Hey everybody, this is Professor Jason Snart. I'm your instructor for English 2250 creative writing, or the Introduction to Creative Writing online here. I try to do a number of these little video things just to give a kind of a face to the name and a little bit more of a human element to the online course. So this is pretty informal, just welcoming you to the course. The first thing that I'm going to ask you to do here is really just to kind of familiarize yourself with Blackboard and the layout of the course itself. So there's a few of the links here you'll see at the left, including the syllabus, which sort of describes the course and policies and stuff like that. There's a student home pages, which is part of the first unit that we'll be doing, but the main links that you want to look at or just be conscious of in terms of kind of the structure of the course itself are the units and the due dates. So if I click myself into the due dates, what you'll see is the first day of classes, the last day of classes, but how each of the units that we'll be working through, all the due dates break down. So Unit 1 is due Thursday, January 17th, Unit 2, Thursday, January 24th, etc., etc. It just sort of goes on like that. So it's not a self-paced course, it's not correspondence, it's not just you and me corresponding. It really is kind of a class experience, which is again why I try to put a sort of a face to what's going on here. So really you're just working through each of the individual units that will have various kinds of assignments, all taking place online or through Blackboard here, and everything is due by the due date. Pretty straightforward. Again though, part of what you want to do right at the start is really to look at, even if you don't read thoroughly at this point, open up all of these links just to see like what stuff is where. So obviously the grade breakdown you're going to want to look at. A major component of what we do in the course is a workshop, which if you've done face-to-face before is pretty straightforward. A group of writers gets together, everyone brings a piece of writing, shares it with the group beforehand, and then gets feedback. Pretty simple. You might wonder like how we're going to duplicate that in the online setting. It actually works quite well because one of the hardest things about the face-to-face workshop is getting everybody a copy of the poem or the short story or whatever we're going to be discussing for that day, and then making sure people have time to give you meaningful feedback, and from the writer's perspective to get feedback that's substantive or that you can really work with, which is actually harder to do, ironically enough, face-to-face when you're not necessarily getting written comments. Well, because we're just virtual here, we're still going to work in groups, and those are all set up throughout the course. You can see where they are. So you're actually going to be posting your work for others to read, and then so they'll have a document that they can look at and mark up virtually, so they'll actually type into it, this is a great part, or I don't understand why the character would say this, or this is a typo, or whatever it might be, and then actually give that document back to you. So we don't have that immediacy of the face-to-face, which is kind of cool, but in fact you end up, and I think it makes up for it, you end up as a writer getting really, really good feedback from the 4 or 5 or however many people end up being in your group. So the workshop, which is really the centerpiece of our class, actually works quite well in the virtual setting. But again, we'll experience that, and there's lots of, how the workshops work, a note on the feedback you'll get and all that kind of stuff that we'll look at as we get a little bit closer to those workshop days. Again, if you click yourself into due dates here, you'll notice that, the first workshop is a short fiction, so short story workshop. That doesn't happen until about mid-February, and there's a couple of different due dates for that. So again, you can sort of see how everything is laid out in the course. I've really tried to make it as, I guess, transparent as possible so that you don't necessarily need me kind of explaining this stuff to you. It is hopefully self-explanatory within the course itself in terms of just the technical side of like when something's due, how do you post work, what are the requirements, and all that kind of stuff. So for Unit 1, which I can click myself into, it's really just a unit of introduction, so kind of getting you to do a little bit of what I'm doing here. There's 2 parts to it. You're creating a student homepage, and again, There's no technical skill involved aside from just following directions and using Blackboard here. Everything is laid out in a pretty step-by-step kind of fashion. I teach a lot online, so I'm really conscious of what that experience is like, and how I can't just sort of put stuff randomly up and hope that people will figure it out. What's obvious to me, because I put it up that way, I know is not always obvious to other people who kind of don't go in with that knowledge of how it's supposed to work. But anyway, a couple of pretty simple introductions. Your homepage, you're really just talking about yourself. The main thing to get credit here is to have a picture so we can actually see who you are. It doesn't have to be formal or fancy or anything. It has to be of you. Some people post pictures of their dogs. Unless your dog is doing the writing, which is pretty spectacular, just a picture of you is best. There's another component to our introductions unit then, our first discussion board. It really sort of duplicates what the homepage does in a sort of way, because you're really just introducing yourself. But part of what we also do here is get used to using the discussion board, which is going to be really, again, one of the most important tools that we use in Blackboard. And you're also having the opportunity to actually respond to what other people have written. So again, kind of easing us into one of the main components of our class, which is really class interaction. So hopefully that's a bit surprising, in as much as if you thought this was going to be a very solitary experience, it really isn't. And hopefully you've done other online classes that are beginning to move towards this more kind of cohesive sort of class feel to it, as opposed to a very, like, you read the book and you do this kind of stuff. You email something out and it goes to who knows where, and, you know, not a very human or fun experience, I don't think. But anyway, let's see, how am I doing on time here? Good. The only other thing that I wanted to talk about briefly that's in the course, but it's worth mentioning here, is that a lot of people go into a creative writing class, whether it's an intro or a genre class like poetry or creative nonfiction or whatever, really concerned about, is their writing good enough and all of that kind of stuff. And it's a legitimate concern, but it's absolutely not one that we have to worry about here, which may sound counterintuitive, like your grade is not based on your writing. It's kind of that simple. Your grade is mostly based on the quality or the investment of energy on your part. So even if the product isn't perfect, especially when we're doing workshops, if you've made the effort to apply the principles from the work we do in the course to the writing that you're doing, that matters much more than whether you produce this perfect poem, right? And so, like, people have not necessarily written a poem before or a creative nonfiction before. These are new genres for them. So the course really isn't about how good a writer you are. It is, for the most part, about whether you've followed directions, done things on time, and made a real investment in kind of reflecting in the work that you do, application of stuff that we've talked about in the class, whether it's from the textbook, from the course itself, from stuff I've said through these videos. So there is a large component of the grade that's based on your effort, but it really is not a course about who's the best poet or the best writer of fiction or whose story is the best. It can't be about that because, you know, people are at varying levels of experience when it comes to not just writing, but even writing in particular genres. Someone might be great at poetry, but has never written a short story before, or vice versa, or whatever the case might be. So I encourage you to see how the grade breaks down unit by unit, and also to read some of the stuff about, you know, how the workshops work, how they're graded, and to really be conscious of not thinking that your grade is going to be based on how good your writing is. The course just doesn't work that way. Your grade is based on following directions, doing stuff on time, and really making sure your work reflects an effort. So if you're doing it the night before, it just won't. And one of the nice things for me, but maybe not you, about Blackboard, is that everything you do is automatically time and date stamped by the computer. So I can see if you're always the guy at the last minute who's posting and responding twice in the space of 6 minutes. That just doesn't reflect very well. and will be reflected in your grade. So whether you write the perfect short story or not, it almost doesn't matter as long as there's effort made and things are done correctly, according to the directions. So word count, stuff like that. I mean, not complex stuff. And you've done stuff on time. So again, this due dates link is your best friend in the world. Okay, so that's going to be it for now. I will check back in, on a pretty regular basis with these just to see how things are going. There's my contact info is in the course here, but you can, send an email or whatever. Look me up on Skype if you want. It's a good way to get sort of immediate stuff if you find me online. And hopefully the course is fun. That might sound weird the first day, but I think you're going to find it to be a rewarding experience and maybe not exactly what you had thought it was going to be. All right, I'll talk to you soon.